Welcome back to Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph, and in this video and the next three videos, we're going to be discussing best practices for strengthening the pectoralis major muscle and the serratus anterior muscle. Now, with respect to the pectoralis major muscle, it has three unique parts of it: upper fibers, middle fibers, and lower fibers. And although the functions are similar, they're different enough to where targeting each of the different sections requires different exercises, or at least different approaches to those exercises. So in this video, we're only going to be covering the upper fibers of the pectoralis major. So before we get into the specific exercises for how to target those, let's go over some key important points that really explain why you would want to do that, and also how you go about doing that. So the first reason that you might want to target the upper fibers of the pec major is aesthetics. So from a bodybuilding perspective, if you're just doing flat movements, so the bench is totally flat and you're doing bench press, you're doing push-ups that are totally horizontal, you're doing chest flies that are exactly horizontal, parallel to the floor, those are effective at targeting the middle chest, and they actually get a lot of lower chest also. But they don't really get near as much upper chest, and so the upper chest fibers are going to be the most likely of any of them to be deficient from a hypertrophy point of view. So you really do need to, from an aesthetic point of view, to build the upper chest, you need to do upper chest specific exercises. And generally speaking, as we'll see in a few minutes, those are done on an incline. Reason number two is the bench press. And I'm talking about the flat bench press, correct form of which you can see on the right side of the screen. So in a correctly performed flat bench press, what you see is that the bar does not just traverse vertically up and down, okay? That's actually going to put a lot of stress on the shoulders. What you actually do is, as you're pressing up out of the hole where the bar is on your chest, it comes up, but it arcs superiorly towards your head. Not a huge amount, but it does arc superiorly. So there's also a horizontal movement to it, not just vertical. And that superior trajectory, because it's moving basically towards your head, there is a large component of that movement that is facilitated by the upper fibers of the pectoralis major. And so if the upper fibers are a weak link in all the muscles that collectively provide you with a bench press movement, then your bench press is going to be limited. So it's in your best interest to strengthen the upper fibers of the chest, not necessarily to get better at incline bench, but actually to get better at flat bench, because of that upward trajectory that you need to correctly perform the movement. And reason number three, it's protective. One of the most common things that you'll hear from people who are doing pressing type of movements and even fly movements is that they have anterior shoulder pain. One of the things that's often said, and it's very true, is that you want to keep strength and also warm up in key secondary and stabilizer muscles like the upper back muscles, the lats, the rotator cuff muscles, etc., etc. And when those muscles are weak, or even if they're strong and just not appropriately warmed up, you can end up with anterior shoulder pain. Well, another thing that protects against that is the upper chest. If the upper chest is really weak, then it puts a lot more stress on the anterior shoulder, and that can lead to anterior shoulder pain. I can tell you this from experience. I used to not do a lot of incline movements. I started doing a lot more of them, and in addition to strengthening some of these other muscle groups I just mentioned, anterior shoulder pain started to dissipate, and eventually it is gone with pressing type of movements. So there's a lot of reasons that you want to strengthen the upper fibers of the pectoralis major. Hopefully I've convinced you why you need to do it at this point, but now the question remains how. And to understand this, let's take a brief look at the anatomy of the pectoralis major. So the pectoralis major has three separate components. You have the upper fibers, which you can see here are termed the clavicular fibers or clavicular head. You have the middle fibers, which are termed the sternal or sternocostal fibers. And then you have the lower fibers, which sometimes are termed the abdominal fibers or the abdominal head. Okay, you see I've added that in there. And what you see is that all the fibers, no matter which portion you're talking about, they all have a horizontal component. And that means in order to activate any part of the pectoralis major effectively, you have to have a component that is horizontal adduction. So meaning you're starting in a more horizontally abducted position, you bring the arms inward, and that is your horizontal adduction. You have to have that component. If the motion's completely vertical, you're not really going to have any chest component. Okay, it's going to be other muscles taking over. Also, if we look at the fiber orientation of the clavicular fibers, the upper fibers that is, you see they have an angle of inclination of about 30 to 40 degrees, sometimes even as much as 45 degrees. So that means that not only do we need a horizontal adduction component, but we need that horizontal adduction component to have an angle of inclination consistent with those fibers in or around that plus or minus 5 to 10 degrees. Okay, that type of motion, that is how we are going to effectively target the upper fibers of the pectoralis major. So that is the form dictates function argument. But what equipment do we use to best target the upper chest and really the entire chest as a whole? Well, here's a study right here that looked at bench pressing, and they technically did it in a flat position, a supine position, but understand that these arguments will have carryover for a decline and incline position. So they looked at a Smith machine, which is in black, a barbell bench press, just standard flat bar in gray, and then white is dumbbells. And what you see is no statistical differences on the concentric component on the bottom, but on the eccentric component. What we see is that you get significantly better pectoralis major activation with dumbbells versus a Smith machine. Now, there's no difference between the Smith machine and the barbell, and no difference between the barbell and the dumbbell, but the Smith machine and the dumbbell, that difference highlights one very important point. When you are using a Smith machine, the Smith machine moves on a fixed path, okay? So when the bar comes down, the bar is going to touch the chest, and that's the limit. It can't go any lower, meaning you are limited in how much the pectoralis major can stretch at the bottom. Whereas with dumbbells aren't connected to each other, so you are free to not only finagle the position a little bit up and down, but you can target a maximum stretch on that pectoralis major. You can't do that on a Smith machine. Now, I suspect that the reason there's no difference between the dumbbell and the barbell is because with a barbell, the barbell does not move on a fixed path. And it may be a little slightly inferior to the dumbbells, but as it's coming down, again, you can kind of finagle the position to get maximum stretch on the muscle. So bottom line here, what we know from other studies, in addition to this study, is that if you're going to choose between a Smith machine and a dumbbell, definitely use dumbbells. But any way you do this, you just want to have maximum stretch on the pectoralis major at the bottom. And that goes for any of the three heads, okay? Then, here's another study that looks at the angle of inclination to target these various muscles. And if you look here, the upper chest, PMUP, pectoralis major upper portion, is in the brown circle. And what you can see is that apparently the best angle of inclination is 30 degrees. And if you look at most incline bench machines or just the bench itself for free weight barbells, they're about 30 degrees, very consistent with this. Some people will say, oh, you want to go a little bit above that. This study is suggesting 30 degrees, but in the end, you just have to use what works best for you personally. And the best way to know if that works is to build a mind-muscle connection with that upper pectoralis major, really any muscle that you are dealing with. So we've gone over the theory now. Let's take a look at the exercises. Now, the first exercise we're going to cover here is the incline bench press, which you can see right here in the video clip. Now, when you're performing the incline bench press, there are two big components that you want to make sure you cover. This is true of any of these. Number one, you want maximum stretch on the target muscle. Number two, you want the angle of inclination of the bench to be about 30 degrees, and that is certainly the case with this particular machine. There's multiple ways you can accomplish this. Like I've said before, you can use dumbbells. Dumbbells allow you to get a really good stretch, but you are limited by the stability that your shoulders can provide because they are not fixed in place and they're separate from each other. So you have that component. You could use a straight bar, but again, you might be limited on the stretch. So a cambered bar, a free weight cambered bar, is going to be much better than just a standard Olympic bar. Or if your gym has a machine like this, you can use this. And this has a similar motion to dumbbells, except in this case, they move on a fixed path. So stability is taken out of the equation and you can really focus on the target muscle at hand. Okay. With this, you'll notice I'm using a very wide grip. I'm actually gripping the handles about as wide as possible. I've got pretty long arms. So some people may be able to grip a little narrower. I have to grip very wide on this in order to really get the chest instead of having the triceps and shoulders take over, okay? But again, incline bench press is absolutely phenomenal for your shoulder health. It's phenomenal for getting your chest to grow, and honestly, I like this variation better than any of the other bench presses. So really nice exercise. Exercise number 2 is an incline chest fly. Now, there's multiple different ways you can do an incline chest fly. My favorite is with a cable machine. Normally with chest flies, I would say to sit down in one of the benches with back support, because that back support will give you that stability. However, in this particular setup, I'm not able to do that because it would put me too low to the ground and I wouldn't be able to get the movement with this particular piece of equipment. So I have to stand. But in general, with this incline chest fly, I don't find that I'm lifting so heavy that it's pulling me back. So as long as I take a little staggered stance, one foot in front of the other for balance, the stability is just fine. When you're doing this, a couple big things. As you let the cables come down, you want to make sure you're not slouching. Stand nice up tall. That's going to get maximum stretch on the upper chest muscles. You might even at the bottom, you don't have to do this, but even gently squeeze the shoulder blades together a little bit. That'll even further accentuate it. That stretch in the upper chest and the serratus anterior that we'll be talking about in the next video. And when you come up, you're shooting for that angle of inclination of 30 to 45 degrees. For me personally, I find 45 degrees works a little better, but to each their own. You have to find what works best for you. So that is the upper chest fly. Favorite way to do it is with the cables. 2 at the same time. The third exercise here is the deficit incline push-up. Now, a lot of people think push-ups are regression exercises. That's easier than a bench press. Why would you do a push-up when you could just do a bench press? Well, if you're just rushing through the reps, going out as fast as you can, trying to get up to 100, okay, maybe it's going to be pretty easy and you feel like you could add a lot more weight. We're going to change that with the form on this. So a few things here. If you're trying to target upper chest with a push-up, number 1, your feet need to be higher than your hands. If your feet are lower than your hands, that's going to be more lower chest. If they're on the same level, that's middle chest. So feet have to be higher than the hands here, and that's because we're facing down instead of up, okay? The other thing that I'm doing here is I have plates that allow me to go really deep into the stretch position. If I didn't have the plates, I'd be hitting the floor really quick. So I want to elevate my hands a little bit so that way I can get really deep into that stretch position. And then I'm not just repping it out. I'm really controlling each repetition, making sure I accentuate the stretch at the bottom and then press all the way up to the top. If you're doing this to really get strong in the upper chest, you are not repping these out. You're going to be much better off doing it slower and controlled and using a deficit. And yeah, it's going to decrease how many repetitions you can do, but this pays dividends over just wasting your time repping it out really quickly. Much better version of the exercise. And we'll actually see for middle chest 2 videos from now, we'll do serratus anterior in the next video, that the middle fibers are targeted very similarly. They just are done at a horizontal angle, not 30 to 45 degrees. So these are probably the best exercises to target your upper chest. Please make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification button for notifications for all videos in the future. Thank you so much, and in the next video, we'll be talking about serratus anterior. Join us then.